Welcome to the Agile Wire, where professional Scrum trainers Jeff Boobles and Jeff Molesky discuss Agile topics. Now, here are your hosts, Jeff Boobles and Jeff Molesky.
And we are recording. All right, Mr. Boobles, kick us off, man.
All right, so this week on the podcast, we've got Julee Everett joining us again. Julee was one of our first guests on the podcast, and we're happy to have her back. So Julee, maybe people didn't or can't remember that episode because it was a couple years ago almost now. Can you give people a little bit of background about yourself?
Sure. Glad to be here again. I'm delighted to be part of your audience as well. I just really enjoyed listening to your podcast, so that's been great. I grew up in the Agile world, moving from Agile project management really through the Scrum Master role, but I really started focusing in on the product and portfolio side of things. It fit my entrepreneurial spirit. It fit my background a little bit better than the Scrum Master role. So just found over the years that I enjoyed working with product and portfolio and particularly product companies. So I've really centered there the last maybe 10 years, in that space.
And you're a professional Scrum trainer, scrum.org. You work as a leader in an organization, working on product and portfolio planning and innovation and discovery and all the good stuff. So
yes.
Lots of experience there. Okay. So we're going to dive right into this, Julee. So we had a discussion before. We're like, what are we going to talk about? So what's the difference between a product owner and a product manager?
I'm so glad you asked. So it's funny because I Google this every time I teach a Scrum class, because this is a big topic that everybody comes up with. So I Google it, and it's something incredible. Like, it's in the billions. You get this result. So depending on the day of the week. So it's pretty fascinating to hear how other people will unpack this concept of product owner versus product manager. So of course I have my own opinion, and it actually aligns with Melissa Perry. I found some work by Melissa Perry. Do you guys know Melissa Perry's work? Mm-hmm. The Build Trap. She wrote the book, The Build Trap.
Oh, I've heard of that.
Okay. But yep.
Yeah. And she's a professor, I think, at Harvard. So not necessarily at Scrum, but Agile product management. So she does some product work there. So I enjoyed something that she said. So I'm going to paraphrase her. Hopefully I won't butcher it. But essentially, the product owner is a role on a Scrum team. If you take away Scrum, what does that role do? That is the role of the Agile product manager. And I have found that to be the most simplest explanation that I could find to talk about the difference between product owner and product manager. If you're not doing Scrum, there is no product owner, right? There's an Agile product manager who is helping to form, the landscape for that team and connecting strategy. Strategy should inform delivery, and that role is making that connection between strategy and delivery.
Yep.
So what makes it different though? Like you tacked on the magic Agile word in there, right? So what's the difference between a regular product manager and an Agile product manager?
I think a couple of different things change dramatically. I think planning is much more incremental when you're working in any kind of business agility. So you're assuming that you're going to have change, or not just welcoming change, but you're excelling at change. I think planning changes dramatically. I think the feedback loops are much more intentional. Mm-hmm. So planning and feedback, I think, are much quicker, having that very intentional, loop. I think that those conversations about having roadmaps right now, understanding now, next, later, the horizons could be very, very short, especially in this business landscape that we're in. We could be talking about a 3 to 6 month horizon, depending on your domain, versus 3 to 5 years.
I'd also say that there's a difference. Like when you think of product management, what if we're creating a brand new food product, or we're creating brand new cereal? I don't know. We're gonna put something else in our tricks. I don't know, another flavor. And you're a product manager, and you're going to add that. You're going to do some A/B testing. You're going to do some validation with some focus groups. You're going to do some different, types of discovery. But you might not be so directly involved with engineering or the ingredients group. Like, you might be doing a lot of the market research. You might be doing a lot of the surveys and overseeing that type of stuff, collecting some analytics, things like that, which is all stuff that I think an Agile product manager should do. But I think there's a lot more connection with the day-to-day as an agile product owner, but I think sometimes people lose that, depending on the scale, I should say. I mean, I can back it up a second, because if you have one team and you're a product owner, you're going to do different things than if you're a product owner and you're working with 7 teams underneath your one product, right?
Okay, I could buy that. But in all those things, wouldn't a Scrum product owner do all those things? We want that Scrum product owner to do all those things as well.
They would do that plus a bunch of other stuff, right? They would be more involved with the day-to-day of like, well, how do we actually iterate? How do we validate this, more frequently?
Wait, who's doing more of that? The Agile product manager?
The Agile product owner, right? Or Agile product manager, right?
Now we're confusing ourselves.
I know, our terms are getting mixed up here a little bit. But so I think of a product owner as an Agile product manager. I think that's what you said, right? But a product manager is somebody that it's a pretty standard industry term that could be many different things as well.
Okay, I'll buy that. Yeah, I mean, it's the horizon. The horizon is very large. So I say the threshold is very wide. And when people go through that threshold, they can end up specializing in things that may be way outside the realm of what a Scrum product owner would do. They may not, have a specialty in pricing or bundling products, or, hopefully a Scrum product owner really understands their market challenges and their competitors. Mm-hmm. But I would say a product manager has more in-depth knowledge of their markets and the segments that they're serving. I'd love to see, we teach this in Scrum, right? We want to see some of that entrepreneurial DNA be absorbed into that Scrum product owner role. Mm-hmm. I'd love to see that gap close more and more and more. But to your point, the more teams that they're supporting, the more they're going to have to rely on people to do more of that day-to-day.
So as you guys were talking about this, and again, I'd love your feedback on this, but I don't know if I'm just biased because this is the experiences that I've had, or if this is more holistic to the industry. I have I'll just be blunt. I have a pretty cynical take on product managers, because what I have experienced is a person who sits in an ivory tower pontificating about great ideas, and then they just throw it over the wall to a delivery team.
Yes.
Right.
The difference is a product owner is much more involved with the execution and validation than just doing planning of what should happen and then saying, make it happen, kind of thing. Right.
Right. And
but we're stereotyping. And I will say I'm working in an organization right now who is very intentional about trying to create that connection. So their vision would be maybe a 70-30 between I'm working in my product management world, right? 70% of the time, but 30% of the time I'm informing and communicating and collaborating, with delivery. So there is much more of an emphasis on that strategy and entrepreneurial stance. And that 30% they're still informing. So is it the role, or is it the organization?
Yeah, and this is where I want to go with it, and that's why I want to be careful. Am I biased because this is just my experience, or is this more holistic? We literally just talked with Marty Kagan just before the holiday, and thinking about that conversation, coming back. These aren't his words, so forgive me, but he even articulates it as discovery and delivery when he's thinking about product management. Right? It is both sides of that. And one of my New Year's resolutions was to more personal growth. So I actually took his coaching chapter and broke it down into a coaching plan. And I just really want to quickly cover, here are all the domains that I would say an industry thought leader is throwing out there. So knowledge around your product, your users and customer data, industry domain, business company, and product operational. That's all the knowledge areas that he wants you focusing on. And then areas like you were just talking about, Julie, your sales and marketing, your finance, your legal, your business development, any additional ones that might be unique to your organization. And then there's these execution ones. So process skills, product discovery, product optimization, product delivery, and then 6 other domain areas that are out there. So it's a pretty damn big bucket that we're talking about when we just think about product. Mm-hmm. But I do think it's really interesting, this conversation that keeps coming up around, well, what's a product owner? What's a product manager? Where do they live? And really, what should they be doing? Now, I really care mostly about the product owner side of this, which I think is, to what we've just been saying, the same thing. It's just an agile product manager. But in
Scrum. In Scrum.
Yes.
But what if your team is not doing Scrum?
Well, that makes no difference. It's saying I if we're playing chess and I have a piece that's called a rook, But if we're not playing chess anymore, well, then what the fuck is the point of this title called a rook? It only makes sense in the domain of a chessboard or a chess game.
But that's the thing that gets lost. If people try this one size fits all, or they want to label this, if we're doing Agile, then we have product owners. But we were just talking about Kanban. In Kanban, right, is there a flavor of product management in Kanban?
Should be.
Who is it?
Right? There should be. And I think that's a bias that's out there too, right? People think Kanban's for support and for maintenance and things like that. But I think it works amazingly well for delivery and for building products. And so, yes, I think there needs to be somebody that has a product focus. And do they have a role? No, but you can add anything onto Kanban. But I would say what makes things very confusing is there's a lot of other frameworks that do different things, or different companies doing different things that are just using the word product owner, but it means a different thing. And so then we need another word for that. And that's where it gets so confusing. We got Safe, who calls it a product owner, but it's not a product owner. That's a team owner. That's a team leader. That's not a product owner at all. They don't own a product. They own a team and their delivery and what they're going to work on. There's feature owners in some organizations where they own a feature across multiple teams and they're helping to oversee that. There's project managers who might do very similar stuff to a feature owner, right? There's platform owners we were talking about before who own a platform, but that might not be a platform that has specific customers. It might just be something that other, development teams use and absorb. And so is that different? It may be. There's portfolio product owners and they only do the strategy. They don't do the tactical stuff, more like a product manager, maybe in our traditional world. So I think there's all these words that mean the same thing, and that gets very confusing out there. So you have to whenever someone says, I'm a product owner in an organization, cool, tell me more about that. What do you actually do day to day? Where are we at here? That's my next question, because it's such an overlord word at this point.
And what a litmus test for me is when I'm thinking about that role is what happens if you say no? If you say no to a request, what happens? That just understanding that scenario and understanding their empowerment kind of helps me take away the labels. It kind of helps me to understand how they're positioned. Are they positioned with a product focus? Use that phrase, product focus. I love that. If we took away labels, we just said, okay, what should this role do? Product focus, right? I love that. And then are they positioned to make decisions that can be upheld? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, another good question to ask somebody to figure out where they're at in the product owner realm here is to say, what does success look like for you? And if you get a response like, oh, my stakeholders would be really happy, and you dig into that, well, who do you mean by stakeholders? Well, that VP over there and this director over here, if they're happy with what I'm doing, then I'm successful. And it's like, well, you forgot about your customer. You forgot about, are we solving a problem in the world? What metrics are you measuring that against? How do you know? So if they give you more of a product focused answer, and they say, yeah, I got to keep these things in mind, and these people, compliance over here and security over here, they're going to make sure that I don't do anything crazy and mitigate risk. But really my success for me is, what does the product do in the marketplace? Well, then we're in a different spot, I think,
So if we can take it away, make it simple, right? It doesn't matter to me whether they're Kanban or Scrum or good old fashioned waterfall, right? Even short increments in waterfall can work really well. If you say who's uniquely positioned to connect the product strategy with delivery. So strategy is informing delivery. Who's uniquely positioned on the team to do that? It could be as simple as that. Mm-hmm. Here's a question for you. Flip side, if you take away Scrum, right? Who's the product owner? We're just talking about that. So if you take away Scrum, what is the career of the Scrum Master? If we're focusing in on Scrum, just a little bit, making that correlation.
I mean, organizational coach, probably more traditionally, it might have been a manager in some organizations without Scrum. I don't know, Jeff, what are you thinking? Go what's the traditional role?
So I've actually thought about this question a lot personally, and I don't have a good answer but it does tie in with one of the questions that I had for you. So I'll kind of wrap it in, but what does portfolio mean? And the reason I asked that is I'm a little embarrassed, but I've always just thought about it as zooming out in the organization. Typically you're starting with one product or a vertical or something like that. And when we're talking portfolio, all we're doing is bringing the perspective up higher. And I'm bringing that up because that ties in with the question of the Scrum Master, which is typically a Scrum Master for better or worse, is just like a starting out or I hate using associate product manager or something like that, more of one vertical, one area, but then you start to zoom out with experience and skill level to look more holistically at the organization. So what does that mean for a Scrum Master to go from one team or one product area and kind of scale out? I don't know what the job title is for that, but somebody who just focuses on empowerment and execution or delivery of teams, like whatever that title or role happens to be. I don't know if there is something out there, but like that is what I would expect a Scrum Master to grow into.
Essentially coaching, business coaching or people coaching. What?
Sure.
But I'll give you another example. So my wife worked in healthcare for a long period of time. And so they want to do continuous improvement, process improvement. What would happen is they would get a committee together, and then there might be doctors and nurses and medical assistants and managers and different people all together, and they would come up with different ideas. Or there'd be somebody who had that, and then they'd be nudging these group of people to actually do something. And so I think that what we've done with the Scrum Master role is said, well, when you make it everybody's responsibility, no one really does it. It takes really long. There's a lot of bureaucracy. We got to get everybody's opinion. We need somebody who's just focused on how do we improve the organization? How do we improve things personally? How do we improve things on the team? How do we improve things for our customers? How do we improve our delivery? Like that, continuous improvement. And it usually could have been a manager. It could have been a committee before, but when it's everybody's responsibility, or when you put on a lot of other responsibilities on a manager, a lot of times that just went by the wayside and nobody did it. Mm-hmm. So Scrum gives you a focus on it because, if we continue to improve a little bit every day, that there's an exponential growth. There's compound interest there that happens. And that can be, a game changer for a lot of organizations.
So I see, in SAFE, they have this role of release train engineer, right? And then I've seen this role delivery manager. Kagan talks a little bit about delivery manager, right? I've actually even seen in the UK, that's actually a career, delivery manager, this concept of marrying more of the project manager role, which we would traditionally think of in Scrum as a lot of those things, really total cost of ownership, understanding where we are against to release our product accountabilities, right? So then there's this concept of delivery manager. So I think we haven't come up with a good, simple solution yet there. To me, it's not as elegant as where I can feel like I can land with the product owner role, like take away Scrum. It is the person with that product focus. With the Scrum Master, though, I do think that maybe it's not a one size fits all. Maybe it's very much around the domain and what does the organization need to scale. But somebody who's uniquely focused on the care and feeding of the team. What does that look like? Is it technical? Is it mentoring? Is it community practice? Is it process? I don't know. So that's a good discussion, though.
Yeah, I think it's very different. It's different in every organization, that's not doing Scrum. They probably have someone that's supposed to be responsible for that or some group, but is it standard in all companies? I don't think so. Not in my experience. Jeff, what do you think?
I was thinking the same thing, like even thinking about, current domain and who it's I'm rambling a little bit here because it's a squishy question. Like, who is accountable for getting the work done? In this, so I was just talking about like, hey, I created this coaching plan for myself because I feel like that is something that I need to own, and I want to be in the driver's seat of my career growth. And so thinking about it from the area of I'm accountable for getting shit done. Like if I'm on the delivery team or the Scrum team or whatever that happens to be, like I would expect that we are taking steps as a team to improve that. But if we're not, who is there to kick us in the ass and say, hey, you all aren't even thinking about X, Y, and Z. Who is that person? In Scrum land, that's the Scrum Master, but take away Scrum, who should that be? Yeah. You brought up earlier the coach. Great. That's great if your organization has a coach, but like, I guess I really have a good answer for it here, but like that is definitely.
Yeah. Well, it's fascinating because when organizations start to scale, and let's say we know SAFE is out there, and they have tons of great content that everybody can borrow from, or they can adopt SAFE. But if people don't want to adopt SAFE, if they want to create something that works for them and their maturity, right? Mm-hmm. Like it is it is right now. What I'm seeing is a pattern of like, okay, well, let's adopt this. Let's work here. Let's bring this together. But I just think at the end of the day, we have to simplify it. We have to just make it, because no matter what we decide around a table or write in a document, until you're actually in it and working with this intention of getting better every day, then those boundaries are not going to become clear, because it is going to be different for every domain and every company and every product. Value, focusing on value, right? Who's focusing on the product? Who's focusing on the business value? To your point, Jeff, about portfolio, I think a portfolio is multiple products at whatever level it is. It could be at a vertical, it could be at a business, line of business, it could be at your enterprise. I think that's one of those words that could scale. And then who's focusing on those care and feeding of the team and the feedback loops.
Mm-hmm. You made me think of things like, I'm like, well, who does this stuff that we're talking about that a Scrum Master maybe helps with? The Scrum Master takes a different stance, and it's more of an influencing role instead of a like, I'm going to tell you what to do role and you're going to do it. But like in a traditional organization, somebody sets, say, what are the metrics? How do we count if we're successful or not? There's some competition from a market or what we're selling or whatever it is. And then there's coaching. And a lot of times I think a manager is responsible for those 3 C's. I just heard that the other day, counting, competition, and coaching. I think that's why
say it again. Counting,
competition, and coaching.
Competition and coaching. Interesting.
Three C's to like, how do you
What's
measure
the competition? Market?
Market. Like in the market, are we successful?
Okay.
Like, are we doing something?
So if we're not doing Scrum, the manager is the person doing
or
it.
It could be competition even internally in a lot of organizations.
But that's product. Product should be focusing. Well, maybe it's different on both. It's different on both levels, because what I'm counting as a product, anybody as a product focused person is going to be hopefully different than what a delivery focused person is counting.
Sure. Yep. The metrics there. So
I have to do a shout out as we're talking about all this, because I am a big fangirl of Sanjeev Augustine. I don't know if you have followed any of his work, but he's released a new book that said, I think I'm gonna butcher it, PMO to VMO. So adopting more of a value management office mentality versus a project management office mentality. So in this space, I think it's a very relevant body of work. I want to throw that out.
All right, Julie. So let's just say you have the single threaded leader inside of an organization that's responsible for vision, making decisions on where we're going from the product, the metrics, the outcomes. What about the management of the people? What are your thoughts on that? Like, where does that belong? Does that belong with that person? Does it belong in a separate role? Like, how do those people improve and grow in their careers? And who helps with that?
I early in my career was heavily influenced by Mary Poppendieck, and she was really one of the early ones in my sphere of influence who was talking about agile management, how to manage in an agile, lean organization, right? And really talking about that business side of the world. And she has this concept of separating out entrepreneurship, who's responsible for the outcome, from professorship. So she has the entrepreneur role, which is all these things that we're talking about with product and portfolio. Forget about the labels. And then the professorship, who's mentoring and helping to cross-pollinate standards and grow the people. And those should be 2 separate roles so that it doesn't feel like one person is owning both of the people's time and the outcome, because that can get very, very unbalanced. Mm-hmm. So at the end of the day, if we're talking about making it simple, I like to come back to like, what's the simplest way we could start to think about that? Let's at least separate those 2 roles. It's kind of like that friction that we look for, that friendly friction that we look for in Scrum with the product owner and the Scrum Master, just at an organizational level.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I related it.
Yeah.
What's your tip on it?
So I like that, but I also go back to like, if we're a startup and we're 5 people and I own the startup of 5 people and we're building a product, I'm probably going to own that. I'm not going to outsource that, because I don't have the time or the money to like not do that myself at this point. Like
if you're that small, why can't they just do it themselves? Why do they need that?
Sure. But let's just say somebody needs coaching and mentoring, and maybe I have that experience on whatever they want to learn. Why can't I do that? Or why can't they do that for each other? Exactly. I love it. Like, that would be great.
Yeah. Like a community of practice, right?
Yeah. But
then you're one voice. Then you're wearing that hat. You're one voice, but they're growing their own mentoring and self-managing skills.
And they might need to do some of that outside of because it's just, we can't provide that service yet inside of our organization. It's just, we may not have the funds for that. But as you
if you could design your own lean startup right now, would you look at these as 3 different roles product portfolio and whatever we're calling. Forget about whether we're using Scrum or Kanban, whatever that delivery focused person, would you do those as 3 separate roles?
Product
roles doesn't have to be people. Maybe.
So my opinion would be I'd put product and portfolio together. I try to keep that together.
Okay.
And then
I could see that.
then I would have that person that's like mentoring and coaching and working towards continuous improvement with people. I would give that a separate focus pretty quick.
Do they need to be technical?
Do
they need to be technical in terms of whatever technical means for that domain? Like if it's marketing, do they need to be a marketing expert? If it's software, they need to be a coding.
I think they have to be able to know what they're talking about. Do they need to be an expert in the coding language we're using? Maybe not, but they need to be able to say, well, have you thought of this? Can you go here? Can this person help you? I don't know that they have to be they have to be technical, but they don't have to be like the best programmer there. It's also easier. I think there's trade-offs, but so often I see people that become a really great developer and then they want to take that next step in their career and they go into this management role and then they're very unhappy because they're really good at being technical and developing solutions. They're not so good at teaching other people how to do that. And that's a whole different skill set. They're starting a new career. And so I think we want to make sure that the person that's doing that has the right intentions. They want to build people. They want to build people up, make them a better version of themselves. They want to coach them. That's a very specific skill set. And so I think you have to find the right.
We're back to like the magic ingredients of Scrum. Somebody who's product focused and somebody who's people focused. Like at the end of the day, my friend says you got to nail it before you scale it, right? We make it so complicated with all of these huge organizations, but 35 minutes later, we can go crazy, make it really complicated. But at the end of the day, we're landing back to like 2 focuses.
Yep. Whatever
you want to call them, 2 focuses so that they can keep each other, on the. My coach used to say, if you don't see that friendly friction, then are each of those roles doing enough?
Yeah.
Like you want to see that nice constant, bust the status quo feeling that's happening. And so why do we make it so complicated?
Yeah, so people focus and output focus is what I heard. Like we need 2 people to do those 2 things. What are your thoughts, Jeff?
I was just thinking to your question, like, why do we make it so complicated? I think it is the scaling factor. Like when people, I'm going to make some assumptions here, but when people say Scrum, I'm willing to bet that they have in their head a picture of a Scrum team, right? 6 to 9, somewhere inside of that range of people. And that's their frame of how they're thinking about product. But if we expand that out to say 100 teams, all of a sudden, okay, well, what changes between 1 Scrum team and 100 Scrum teams? And how does that impact the questions that we were just debating? Like who?
No, Jeff, we lost you again.
But I like that question. How does it impact? Okay, so there has to be more because there's scaling, right? There's cognitive overload in every role that we have to be cautious of. But couldn't those just be the 2 simplest guiding principles, right? Like separating out so that people have some, ability to have that ability to grow and master and curious, intrinsic motivators. And somebody really focusing on the outcome and are we building the right thing?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, no matter how big you get or how complicated it gets, can we just like try to bring everything back to like, are we building the right thing? Are we taking care of our people?
Yep. I think that's good. And then when we say we're building a thing and what are we aligning our teams around, is that thing an internal thing we're focusing around or is it an external thing? Is it a customer? Is it a platform? I think that there's some product definition things that we can put in and maybe we can break these things into smaller chunks. And if you can break something into a smaller chunk, it's easier than 100 teams. What if we only had 6 teams over here and 3 teams over here and 4 teams over here focusing on something very independent, that leads into a bigger whole. So as long as we can say like, this is what success is, and this is how it, these are the metrics, this is how there's revenue with this, like it's a profit center. There's not a lot of dependencies between these other groups. We're not managing that. I think those are kind of the secret things that they'd be thinking about.
It's another litmus test question, right? So if you're thinking about like who's product focused and are they empowered? I like to ask like, what happens if you say no? When it comes to metrics, I like to ask people like, what is your favorite metric? What decisions do you make from that number?
Yes.
And I mean, I want to know like, how is that number changing behavior? What's the intent and what behavior does it actually change? Like to me, that's another great, like if you want to keep it simple, it's another great simple question that has a lot of legs.
Yeah, when we're thinking about metrics, if you can't take an action on it or you don't know what action you would take on it, you probably shouldn't track it. There's so many metrics we could get out there today, and you get lost in all the numbers. So I think that's a really good question. Anytime someone shows you a metric, be like, what's actionable at this? What are we going to do about it? If it goes up or down, or, how do we read this?
Yeah, and who's the audience?
Yep. Exactly.
You can have a whole podcast. You probably have one out there about that. It's a whole podcast just about that. So a lot of this is this organizational design thing. I just think, everybody has another word for it, value streams. My friend of mine is working in another massive, big global organization, and they had a big consulting firm work almost a year on designing value streams. And just as they were getting those value streams implemented, that company made a major acquisition. And so everything got put on hold, and everything with the acquisition, upended the bucket because they were merging. And so, but it's a big business out there, this idea of org design and team design, and how do you design streams of value so that you can mitigate dependencies and have these two pillars, this, idea of outcome and people. It's another area. I think it's like the next landscape is, org and team design.
I don't think that org design is something you set and you forget.
Right. I'm with you on that.
And so I think that you were doing org design in a waterfall fashion, it sounded like, from what you described in that story. I think the measure of a very agile organization is like, how fast can you respond from how you align your people around problems? And so if that takes you years to get these value streams set up, you're not a very agile organization right now. What would need to change for that? So I
think if that's happening, you probably didn't survive the pandemic.
Yeah, probably.
I think we're seeing companies who are thriving right now are people who are organizations who are really enabling business agility, who are able to excel at change. And I think that's a paradigm shift, right? I mean, people don't even like to have their workspace moved, right? And so when you're thinking about, can we reorganize? Does it have to be an actual reorganization? Can it be more dynamic teaming? Can it just, be more about like, are we positioning the right people right now so that this group of people can do everything, has everybody and everything that they need to get something done? Does it have to be a reorg, or can it be
just more natural and dynamic? And how fast can you spin up and be very productive as a team? Like if you have very similar values, if you have similar principles that you kind of work with in a group, you can just easily kind of just change and figure out how to work. And can we self-select into that and kind of like let people figure out the best way to do that without having to have some manager over here that says, this is the way it's going to be because we have this new acquisition? Like, how close can we get to the people figuring that out? I think that's a good sign of a responsive or adaptive organization as well.
Can I name organizations on this?
Sure, if you want to. Yeah.
So I just want to give, years ago, I was working for Carfax, and in Missouri, they allowed that. They enabled the developers to reorganize around different product lines. I think it struck fear, panic into people on the product end because they didn't want to lose their favorite developers and their great people. And they did keep a couple of guiding principles, like they would have the a veto power, but they didn't have to use it very much because it gave them about 3 days. And I think it upped the product focuses. I'm using that term specifically because they had to really pitch their product and their roadmap. And then the developers had 3 days to form the organization. And I think it lasted around a year, maybe a little bit more than a year. But they were really good at working with each other on, maybe you wanted to work on a new technology. And so they would give up a team that they really enjoyed to, have that ability. I thought even though we talk about it and we coach towards it, it's the first time I saw it at scale. I was tremendously impressed. So this is an organization who'd been doing XP for about 8 years at the time, and they had brought Scrum in on the business side. and some agile portfolio product type of stuff, very mature in a lot of ways. But I thought that was a phenomenal experience for me to see, to really understand how people's, I think it's that promise theory really kind of enacting, right? Like taking care of each other and respect and having the autonomy. It was only a couple of people where they had to ask, we want more. They didn't want everybody on the team to be new to the organization, and they didn't want everybody on the team to be new to the domain. And that was sort of the guiding principles. And there was only a couple of areas where the leaders had to ask somebody to maybe stay a little bit longer. But I just thought that was a phenomenal major win and very indicative of their culture and their agile maturity.
So I got a client now that I'm working with, and we've been doing team self-selection. I don't know. I think they're talking about the third or fourth one that we're going to do because they've had some teams in different areas and stuff like that. And so this is we're getting pretty good at it now. Like, we've 2 hours and we're going to take a product area with 4 or 5 teams and they're going to be realigned into teams. There's guiding principles and we just do it. Like it's pretty, this is how we do it.
How many people are you talking about?
40, 50, maybe something.
Yeah, that's pretty good. That's pretty substantial.
But now what they're talking about doing, and I'm working on this, we're going to see if we can actually make this happen. But they're moving like we talked about before, they used to have the product owners, they're responsible for management and the team, building the team members up. But they're realizing there's a lot to this product owner role. We got to separate that. And so now we're talking about, hey, how do these people have been identified? They want to be coaches, mentors. That's the kind of manager that we're talking about, not driving tasks or things like that. And but why shouldn't the people be able to pick that person? And so we're working on that. So that might be something we're going to be doing in the future where it's manager selection too and team selection. Who's my best coach for me? Who's going to help me grow the best? I work better with Julie than I do with Jeff. So I'm going to pick her, like she's going to help me at this point in my career. Maybe 2 years from now, Jeff's a better person for me, but right now Julie is. And so I think the people are much better that do the work are much better off to make that choice than some higher level executive that probably doesn't know those people all that well and that deeply.
Yeah, I think we see some of that at play at Menlo with, Menlo at Pivotal Labs. Yeah. Like we see some of that in industry. I think we should publish more around those types of experiments and success stories. We hear a lot from consultants and from leaders, but I think we need to hear more practitioner success stories about seeing some of these things enacted and what are those the secrets to attrition? I think that, right now there's a war. I'm going to use the word resources. There's a war on resources. There's a war on talented people, right? Like just this massive competition. And if we're really thinking about that autonomy, purpose, and mastery, like how do we get there? Pushing the envelope on what they are able to own, I think is going to be one of the secret sauces.
Yeah, but I also think there is a war on talent right now. But there's also there's a lot of people in organizations that they're not working at their fullest potential because they haven't been empowered. They don't have the autonomy. They haven't been given responsibility to master something. And so you can give them that. If you can put them in a situation, maybe they can do what, with a smaller group of people than what you think you need with a larger group of people, just because you've kind of unleashed them. You've given them agency and let them make decisions, and you've shown them that there's a better way of working, and they get a lot out of this, not just profit for, the owners or the board or stockholders or whoever it is, but they get a lot out of that when they get to produce value with a team that's innovating, that's discovering, that's working really well together. Like that's very enjoyable. And there's a lot of value that you get personally from that, So I think you can show people that. And if you can get them to that point, they'll never want to go away from that. They're only going to want to work that way.
One more element of the keep it simple framework.
Yeah.
And all these things exist. We're not inventing anything. Like this is really at the heart of agility. And then, keeping it user focused.
Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts? We talked a little bit about some of this before, like separating the people role and the product role. But what about somebody who's in the delivery role right now today? They're really good. What are your thoughts on that person also having people that they coach and mentor?
Because otherwise, how are you going to cross-pollinate standards? How are you going to, embrace the art of possible when it comes to technology? How are you going to get that autonomy, mastery, purpose at that level? So, absolutely, is it more of the professorship role, perhaps, but there has to be, just like there's an intentional feedback loop, in my opinion, there has to be an intentional learn and adapt across an organization, cross-pollinate the best of the best across the organization. And what is that? How do you do that? What does that look like? I use the term communities of practice loosely, but whether you are, maybe it's just within that, a smaller organization, somebody has to be focused on the craft.
Mm-hmm.
What's your opinion?
Yeah, I like that. I think that we should have leaders inside organizations, inside of teams. Like that's great. We need to have that. We need to share knowledge. We need to learn from each other. I guess there's just trade-offs. Everything in life is full of trade-offs. And if you have a job to deliver and you have a job to coach somebody, what I've seen and practice is that it gets very difficult and it gets very gray on where do I spend my time, because I need to deliver this thing right now, this sprint, this week, whatever. But I also, by the end of the year, I got to get this person to this level, or we're not going to be able to build out this new product area. We're not going to be able to do this bigger initiative. And so I'm fighting the short term versus the long term all the time in my head. And that's a hard cognitive load for people to handle. And so if you can separate that, again, I think it makes it simple, but you still got to be the person that loves that. It's a very different person or different skill set.
Okay, I'm with you. Let me take the opposite of you, lean in the different view. I may not have my thoughts in order to even say this. If you have it as two different people, isn't it the same thing as having a team do innovation and a different team do crowd support? Like, don't you lose the ownership and having the edge of, am I always working on the highest, most valuable thing? Like that edge of like constantly like understanding everything I say yes to, I'm saying no to something else. So is it more about removing the noise and the waste so that you are balancing those two important things, but you're on that edge? Probably not articulated well.
I guess I'm thinking about it. Like just tell me more about it. Tell me some more of the positives of keeping it in one role. Like what would you see as a positive? I get like you're in it, you're doing it. You're not just somebody saying, here, go over here and do this other thing, right? I guess I see that.
But you're owning those trade-offs. You're owning the cost of the trade-offs.
Yeah.
You're owning the cost, right? So you have to and there's no one to blame. You're the one who has to make that trade-off decision. So at the end of the day, if you are, this is polarity management, where it's the yes and, right? Like at the end of the day, how do you do both? How do you keep both of those and not fall below, a threshold? The only thing I can think of right now is like, you got to learn to say no to things that are not focused on your end game. Jeff, you should start, Molesky, you could start talking to us through stickies. So use some visual information radiators to get your voice heard. Maybe in scaling it has to be two different people, but I feel like we're giving up some ownership once we separate those out.
When I think about the people side of things, though, I'm not thinking about somebody who is saying you have to use this technology. We're going to use Angular over React. Like they're not making that call. The team is making that call. They're saying, have you thought about these things? This is the security concerns that I've heard of from the security team. Have you talked with them? Have you talked with the person over here that in compliance? Like, what about our PCI compliance? Like, is this going to affect that if we pick one over the other? Or is one going to be easier over the other? Like, have you thought about like trying something out? How would we validate this? Like maybe can we do an A/B experiment? How could we do that? Like they're giving them ideas. Like that's the kind of role that I would see in this coaching, like to help them grow.
Okay.
They're not saying you have to do it this way or that way. I think the people doing the work have to make those calls on the how absolutely every single time. And we just separate that from the people. Yeah.
Like just enlarging the vision, empowering the vision. That should be coming from, there should be an intentional form where that can come from anyone.
Yep. Exactly. Yeah.
Maybe somebody needs to help guide that. I think that's the community of practice. It's just a more technical versus a behavior or something. It's part of a community of practice.
Yeah. And I think that the only hesitation I have with the communities of practice is that they have to be set up in a certain way. Community practice can't become a steering committee where it's like every technical decision goes to the, front end community of practice. And so if we need to make a styling change or something like that, it takes this long mini month process. It's like, the problem I need to solve is this right now. The slider bar doesn't work the way we have it in our current design. I'm going to tweak it. I'm going to try it over here. We're going to see what happens. We're going to run some experiments. And we might come back to this group and say, this worked really well in this case. Do we want to change this holistically? Like, that's the way I see it. So I think there's not this like, you're going to plan everything and then we're going to execute on it. You have to have a feedback mindset. And that's really what being an agilist is about, is letting go of like, I'm going to do all the analysis and figure out all the right answers and saying, I'm going to get some feedback and I'm going to try some things and I'm going to learn from them.
Okay, so now we have a role focused on product outcomes, entrepreneur, a role focused on people, mentoring, short feedback loops, and a role focused on craft, cross-pollination, technical excellence.
Yeah, I think so. Yep. And in Scrum, we would call those people product owner, Scrum Master, and manager, right? Like,
exactly. It's the trifecta.
Yeah.
We have it all. When we scale, we start adding all of these elements. But at the end of the day, it keeps coming back to, three focuses.
Yep, three focuses. And then we need a team that delivers, then has all the skill sets on it. Like, again, Scrum's got these things built in.
So that's the question, right? Here's a question. Maybe we can take the opposing view. I used to really stand firm on the idea that a cross-functional team is the cornerstone of agility. Like, you can't really do Agile if you don't have a stream, a value stream, or streaming team, or even if it's multiple teams that have everybody and everything they need to do the work. Is that a non-negotiable? Jeff's adding in this concept of its accountability versus a role. I love that. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an accountability. So who's going to own it? And I love that, Jeff, because it's an accountability. So like maybe like what I was talking about before, where you have a very small group of people, for whatever reason, you might merge two of those accountabilities. It might be one person with two accountabilities, but it's very difficult sometimes to balance that trade-offs. But when we can, it does make it simpler to separate them. So Julie, you were saying, like, do you have to have a cross-functional team to be an agile team?
To have real agility, you have to have that cross-functional team. Is it the cornerstone, or is it the end game? Is it the outcome? Is it the cornerstone for beginning, or is it a result?
So I think that you need to have people that we can't have handoffs. We want to eliminate as many handoffs and queues inside of our organization, because then the work time and the queue time, probably the queue time will be longer than the work time, and our delivery will be very slow. If we have slow delivery, we have slow learning. So we need to have accelerated learning. So how do we do that? Frequent delivery. How do you get to frequent delivery? Who needs to be on our teams? That's a question I would ask.
I love that. Slow delivery, slow learning. Great tweet.
I don't know. Came out.
Yeah. So really, it doesn't. I mean, if you have these three focuses, right? Like, we were talking about Kanban earlier. Would you bring those into a Kanban team? Those three. Would you have accountabilities? Well, let's get accountabilities on a Kanban team. Focus on those three different areas.
Yeah,
Would you get that structured?
I think so. It's like, you need to know, like, what are we going to work on? How are we going to improve our process? Who's going to kind of have that accountability to keep us honest there? And how are we getting better, individually in our crafts, right? So I think that, it starts with skills, right? We have to have more people that have more skills. If I'm very agility or specialization is the enemy of agility. That's another tweet for you.
Okay, I like it.
So if you're super specialized in something, then when I don't have that work, what do? I sit there and I wait, and then I say, well, pull me that other thing, and I start more work, and we start a lot of things and we don't finish anything, and then we slow our learning again, we slow our delivery. And so if you have multiple skills as a person, you have you're just able to solve many different problems. When I've got a problem, it might be this, it might be that. I just go to Julee because I know she can solve, no matter what it is, she can solve that problem. That's what we want. And if we can't get it in a person, we'll get it in a team, a group of people that have lots of different skills like that.
That would be the optimum. Like, you don't come to Julee, you come to the team that has that capability. Technical excellence and process excellence.
So Jeff,
I can read it all. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, he said maybe a person should be accountable for both. It could be.
Technical excellence. Why not? I mean, shouldn't everybody have all three flavors: technical, process, and people? But perhaps your strengths and capabilities have more of a weight on one or the other. Like I care a lot about the care and feeding of the team, but I know that I bring more magic to a product focused role than a people focused role.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned that by seeing people who are in that role blow my mind with their coaching and their mentoring and their stabilizing factor. I sort of saw, maybe not that I was bad at it, but I saw that it wasn't as strong as my product focus. And so I got to see that in other people. And I do think that that's missing a lot in agility. I think people are put in these roles where they haven't seen the role enacted in a good way. Never mind that they aren't mentored or they aren't trained, but they haven't even seen agility work or Scrum work or Kanban work, if you want to get specific about frameworks, but just they haven't seen it in play. They haven't seen the success. Like we're talking about self-selection to teams. They haven't seen it, therefore they can't trust it.
Right.
I think that's a shame. It's really growing and being saturated, but people haven't had their own experience and their own testimonials to what works, or how they might have seen somebody bring that, magic to that accountability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess that would be my thing. Like if you're in that situation where you haven't seen it, just try to get to frequent delivery. If you can get to that, just like, what if we didn't all get paid unless we delivered something in this next 2 weeks? Well, how would we
make it even more simpler? Yes. Small batch sizes. That's your friend.
Yeah, let's just do that. And then it's like, well, I didn't do all the things I really like to do, Julie, and you kind of did those things. But I see you, but did you like everything you did? And it's like, no, well, I would really have preferred to do some of those things and not this thing. Well, I love that stuff. Okay, let's figure out how to trade that work in the next time we do some work together. I think that's maybe a thing that people think of when they think of agile teams. Well, now I got to do everything, and I don't like doing that type of service work, or I don't like working in the database here. Like this is just a pain in my ass, and I don't like that. And I don't want to be in an agile team. I want to focus on what I'm really good at. And that's great. Focus on what you're really good at. But also when Julie goes on vacation to Europe, I need to have at least the capability to do the thing that I don't like to do to finish it. I mean, think about any relationship that you're in. Imagine only one person could cook. Like, and then that person's gone for a weekend. What do? You don't eat for a weekend, or you're going to go out and spend extra money? That's very expensive. So like you want to be able to have
outsourcing.
Right. You're outsourcing, right? So you don't want to have to do that. You want to be able to say, well, I don't like to do this. Where you're going to have a trade-off in our relationship. You cook, I'll clean. Because you don't like to do that. Okay. Like that, those are our strengths. That's where we're going to spend most of our time, but you can both do each other's thing if we have to. That's what we're talking about on an agile team.
Yeah. I just want to throw out one more thing, though. I do think that everybody I've worked with in the last several years has been some kind of a global aspect, right? So whether they're offshoring or outsourcing or nearshoring, there is this dependency on people who are not in the same time zone. I think now more than ever that having those wide time zone constraints, I just think that that's an epidemic.
Yeah.
And that we have to start to be willing to reorganize these, if we want to talk about keeping it simple, having all of those focus areas within some time zones that have some kind of reasonable overlap. Because all we're doing is we're setting up a mini waterfall by having, a product focused person in California on the West Coast of the United States, working with a delivery team, in India or Romania. The dependency, the cost of the delay, that cost of latency. What is that
latency.
phrase?
It's decision latency, right?
Yes,
you have to do every day instead of
cost to it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So if there's another element, it's around reorganizing where you don't have that wide separation of roles. And I did have one client who really did that. They didn't do a whole reorganization, but they every time they had a role to fill, they were intentional. For example, they might have product owners in the UK and development teams were in India, but the Scrum Master was in India. The coaches were working with the team, were there with the team. And so and then, if they had people on the West Coast of the United States, maybe only going to near shore or the East Coast, so that the overlap in hours, was 4 or 5 hours instead of, 2, and then somebody's working, at midnight. So I think that in this world of global enablement, we have to start being really intentional about this artificial dependency. It's not artificial. This is pretending that we're not just creating this, waterfall handoff by these time zones.
And why is it? Because we can't have I mean, this is pretty close to face, right? We have video on, we have good audio, we can hear each other. Imagine if I was sending you a message through Slack and then you'd have to respond 24 hours and we try to have this conversation that we're having now within an hour, it would take us months to years to finish this conversation, right? So,
yes.
That's
and now with the pandemic, with the shutdown, if companies have survived, they've invested in the technology and the skill set. I read some phenomenal numbers about even people who weren't familiar with remote technology. Like 90% of those people, of that small subset now, are using remote technology. So like think about maybe a generation who, great grandmother or grandmother who never used Zoom before, probably started using some kind of technology during the pandemic to check in with her family, right? And so that's happened. This investment has happened. So in my mind, there's like no excuses anymore. Mm-hmm. It's more around making those tough decisions around, real trust. Maybe trust is a tough decision. Maybe, setting up that culture of trust and empowerment is really at the core of it.
Yeah.
Like, why do you have to have a robotic person in California and development team in India? Why? Mm-hmm. What's the business reason behind that? Why can't that be, somehow shifted?
Yep. Yeah, that overlapping working hours, I think, is really important. And then having a constant platform for whoever's working together, I think, is also really important. And so I think as some of the people right now are starting to go back to work, I just saw this tweet the other day and I thought, yeah, it's pretty accurate. It said, when you work, remote and when you work in person, you get the best of both worlds. But when you do the hybrid, it's the worst of both worlds. And
hybrid meaning some are
remote, some are in person. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And maybe some organizations got the technology thing figured out, but even the ones that I've been at, not everybody can run it. Not everybody's proficient at it. And so then some rooms have it, some don't, and it's just different. And the people remote they're not at the same playing field, like they're almost like a second class citizen a lot of times, or they become that very quickly, even after we've all been remote. I see this over and over again. So I guess my nudge would be is like, whenever possible as a team, you should just figure out like, we're going to have an in-person day. We're going to have a remote these days, like I've seen that work really well with a number of clients. And figure out what that schedule is. Cause every team it's different, or maybe you can do it all remote. Who knows? Talk about that from your context, but I think the mix is very difficult at this point.
Look at us after all this, all we've come back to is the Agile Manifesto. Sounds like those guys knew what they were doing.
It does, doesn't it?
What are we at 20 some years later? The stuff that worked still works.
Yeah. Yeah, it comes back to that, right?
It really does.
Well, Julie, it's been a lot of fun. We've lost Jeff a while ago, so I think we'll wrap this up. Is there anything you want to plug to our listeners?
Well, I love Sanjeev's new work. I think there's a big focus now on, as we scale, when we're thinking about all of these different verticals, I think focusing in on value. It's always been a focus in Scrum, but I think expanding that conversation and being more intentional about the how, so that we don't create, yet another, dependency, but we empower the people in those roles to really focus in on value and what that looks and feels like. But that means understanding what you're not doing. Mm-hmm. So I think that's been an interesting new thing. Team topologies isn't new, but we talked about that a little bit. That's something that's kind of informing as I'm working in a very technical organization right now with platform, thinking about platform as a product. I think is a really interesting discussion. And I think having this conversation, having this reminder about like bringing it back to basics, whether you're talking about portfolio management or whether you're talking about, visionary organizations or visionary product organizations where everything is focusing in on one platform, like you can keep those elements of simplicity at the core of it. I think we'll find the most success. So it's been a good reminder.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Aligning on those values and principles makes all the nuanced conversations so much easier, right?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Yeah, bring it back to the basics.
Yep. All right. So thanks, Julie, for joining us. And
my pleasure, as always.
We hope to have you back soon.
Thank you for listening to the Agile Wire. We are consistently inspecting and adapting ourselves. We would appreciate feedback at feedback@theagilewire.com or on iTunes, Spotify, or Google Play Store. See you next time.